Hi, my name is Monique Sarias and I'm a subject specialist at the English unit at NSERD. In this session, we will be looking at the enhanced curriculum and I will be talking a little bit about the renewed curriculum for English language. So English, as we know, is Guyana's official language, and it's important because that's the language we communicate in, that's the language we read in. So it's important that students have a good grasp of English language so they can speak, they can write, and they can communicate well and effectively. The curriculum also focuses on listening skills. So as much as we want students to speak and to write effectively, we also want them to develop listening skills, reading skills, and so forth. So the enhanced English curriculum basically focuses on students learning life skills basically. So they're learning to read, like I mentioned before, they're learning to speak, they're learning to write and so forth in context. So they know when to use which words, what tone to use and so forth. So different settings require that you speak differently. For example, the way you speak at home will be different from the way you probably do a speech. So it's important that students understand the nuances of language, when to use it, how to use it, and also when to be quiet, because communication requires that you listen to what the other person is saying so you can respond effectively. Well, one of the major changes is that it allows for deliberate planning. Teachers have to really understand their students to plan the lesson. So the lesson is no longer planned around the content, it's no longer planned around the textbook, it's planned around the students and what the student's needs are, what the student needs are. And I mean, that's the foundation, right? The output in education is the students, how the students perform. So if we can get students to be if we can get students who are well aware of the English language skills, be able to use them, then we can be sure that we can have a society that, understands, a society that can comprehend situations, respond accordingly, and in an area where a lot of miscommunication happens or there's a lot of information out there, students can select what information is factual, what isn't, what is propaganda, what is myth, and beware of dangers that are around them in the form of communication as well. So one of the major tenets of the new curriculum is integration. So integration happens in several ways. So for example, if I'm teaching an English language lesson, I could be talking about global warming. I could be talking about Guyana's resources, and those are topics, or what we call strands now, that you will find in science and social studies respectively. So they're not just learning to read because they have to learn to read. They're learning to read in context. They're learning they're learning about different subjects as well. So it's not just English and you're only doing English. English is linked to what they're doing in school. It's linked to what they see in the world around them. It's linked to what they see on TV afterwards. So it's an integrated approach. So it's no longer, this is math time and we will only be talking about numbers now, or this is English time and we'll only be reading now. It encompasses the entire curriculum. So it's a sort of an approach where one subject relies on the other as well. And it's interesting because teachers can now diversify their teaching for their students. So you may realize that your students are probably weak in this area of reading. So you may spend more time with your students on reading. Another teacher, her students may need more practice with speaking. So give them more oral presentations, more discussion points and so forth. So it all comes down to the teacher having autonomy to decide what her class needs or what his class needs, and to give students that kind of well-rounded approach. So I've just touched on two there, integration and diversity, but it all comes back to knowing your students. And the interesting thing is that you don't have to start from the starting of the book, the curriculum or the guide that's given to you. You can look at that curriculum and you can decide, I would like to start here because this is where my students need the support, or because I know they're weak in this area, I would spend more time on this. So it allows for flexibility. It allows for teachers to now decide what is best for their students. So you may find that some teachers at the same school may be doing different things at the same time in the same subject area because their students have different needs. So the lesson plans will look different. It does not all have to be the same. There may even be times where students don't have to write a lot of notes. And I know parents expect a lot of notes in their students' books, or that the blackboard is filled with a lot of words and so forth. So this new curriculum allows for teachers to move away from the chalk and talk approach and to use more hands-on activities. So students might be placed in groups to have a discussion about a particular topic. They could do composition writing without even writing because they're gathering ideas. They're discussing the plot for the story. And in another session, they can probably write one paragraph. The next session, they write the second paragraph. So the idea is not about getting stuff done or covering the curriculum. It's about ensuring that students learn. And if it takes longer for student X or Y to learn, that's okay, because the teachers understand that with diversity, you have to cater for students who may need additional support. You have to cater for students who are probably migrants, so English may not be their first language, Spanish may be their first language. So there are times that teachers may have to work a little differently with those students while the rest of the class is doing something else at a different level. They're doing the same topic, but just at a different level. Maybe a simpler level, maybe a more advanced level if you have a gifted learner, because you don't want to hold anyone back. So the entire class doesn't have to be doing the same activities. So you may have some students writing a story, for example, today. Some students may be talking about the story. Some students may be acting the story. And some persons might just be summarizing the story. So you look at all their books and their books look different because they were engaged in different activities. And you can't have that kind of, tandem going there if teachers don't prepare. It calls for intense preparation. So if you're not prepared, you can't deliver. It's like cooking. If you decide you want to cook a certain meal, you need all the ingredients. Put that together, you cook your meal. And you got a nice dish of what? Chow mein, curry, something, right? So yes, you mentioned creativity, and I think we would all like to see our students being more creative. Mm-hmm. And we can't have creative students if our teachers are not creative. So, you have the freedom to explore different things with this curriculum, and it may be difficult at first, it may be strange at first, you may be frustrated, but try it and then see how it impacts the students, because we've been hearing reports that students are more interested in what's going on in the classrooms because they're more active. It's no longer boring to them because they have to read and answer questions. So a lot of times comprehension is we read a passage and we answer the questions afterwards. This new curriculum, basically, you're doing comprehension, yes, you have to answer questions, yes. It's done in a back and forth kind of way. So the teachers, for example, as they're reading or as the students are reading, they discuss what this word means, what that word means. So it's not like the whole passage is read and then the questions are coming afterwards. As we're reading, we're discussing, we're conversing, and so forth. And this brings in the assessment part of it as well, because you have the assessments can be in three ways. So it can be product, it can be conversation, or it can be observation. So if my students, for example, create a story, then I could be observing them on this story, and I may have a checklist and say, oh, they got the plot right, they got subject and verb agreement right, they got the content right, whatever I'm looking for in that particular lesson. And my assessment tool there becomes that checklist. So all I need to do is observe if they're writing, what they're writing, how they're writing, and my assessment tool there is already done. So a lot of the focus is on formative assessment. So a formative assessment is you're not waiting until the end of the term to test them. as you finish a topic, as you're doing a topic, they're even learning as they're completing the assessments. So it's both assessment for learning and assessment of learning, and it's done in biteable portions or small portions. So it's not overwhelming to students. And because you're doing it consistently, then you can give feedback to students, or you can figure out what their weak areas are. Because if you don't do assessments, you can't really know if what you're teaching and how you're teaching is the best way for your students. So the assessment kind of provides teachers with the feedback that they need to plan their next lesson, or to probably change their approach if needed. First of all, that comes back to training. So for now, the coastland regions have been covered. They've all been trained. The next step in our training is to focus on the interior and hinterland regions. So that's where the students from the interior will benefit, because their teachers will be trained on how to use this. And it's really interesting because even the private school students have the opportunity to benefit from this new curriculum, because their teachers will be trained as well. So everyone will be using this one curriculum, but it doesn't mean that you all have to do the same thing. For example, I know this is English, but I'm going to touch a little bit on social studies here. So in social studies, for instance, you may be living in a community that is mostly made up of indigenous persons. Then when you are talking about the people in Guyana, you focus more on what's in the community, in the lower levels. And as students get to the higher levels, grade 4, for example, then they start learning about, the other communities, the other ethnic groups, and so forth. So you start with the known and you move to the new. So if you're probably in an area where you have a lot of East Indian persons, you start with that group first, and then you expand to the others. In an African community, the same. And the interesting thing is that, if you are familiar with something, then your previous knowledge will give you all that you need to learn new things. And you got to crawl before you can walk, right? So if we can work with our students on what they already know and build on that, it really helps them. And you mentioned equity, right? So there's a specific part in the lesson plan that talks about diversity, and it comes under needs of the diverse learners. So here is where teachers identify specific students who they will be focusing on. So, and we know we're looking for not just equity in Guyana, but we're looking for oneness, this whole concept of one Guyana, right? And we know there is division still in Guyana, and that's why we need to teach our students about unity, harmony, and so forth. But we can't do that effectively if we don't show students what some of these biases may look like, what being racial is. So some of those difficult conversations will have to come up in the classroom, because if we ignore it, it will never be addressed. And children learn from the community, they learn from school, and teachers are doing their best in ensuring that equity, equality, not being discriminatory, those are practiced at the school level. So I think when we focus on all those good things that we want and those values, then we can really achieve a society that is equitable. Maybe not in the short term, but in the long term, because of course the curriculum has different stages, right? They start at one level and they end at another. I like this one. So critical thinking, it's important for students to develop this skill, but you can't have students develop this skill out of the blue. You have to put them in particular situations. They have to be able to not only express their opinions, but accept that other persons can express a different opinion, but we can still like each other, we can still respect each other. So it comes back to understanding not just your point of view, but the point of view of someone else. And for English, I love English for this, because literature exposes you to so many different types of personalities, so many different kinds of persons. You may not meet these persons in real life, but you can identify with them because maybe somebody in their family is like that, somebody in the community like that. So students learn from experiences, and sometimes those experiences are found in books. So the more you read, the more you learn to think about why this character is doing something, why they didn't do that, or somebody we may see as bad will actually have good traits, or somebody who is seen as good, they have something that they're probably not proud of or that they will not want everybody else to know. So it comes back to them not just reading and calling words, but reading and actually understanding what they read. Because a lot of times, I think it does happen to adults too. Sometimes you read something and then you have to go back and read it to understand because you already forgot what you read. So I think for children, it's important that they have those opportunities to engage with books on an internal level, themselves and the book, to have that interaction, and also to interact with their colleagues, their peers. And like I said, solve those problems. And sometimes it is okay for the teacher to let students solve their own problems, because when we try to solve all their problems for them, they don't learn how to do it when the teacher is not around. So it's important for them to respect each other, definitely. Of course, we're not going to create problems for them to solve, but we can give them scenarios, and then they can solve those scenarios by either thinking or doing or researching even, because that's a skill too that English promotes. Researching using Google, everybody knows Google, right? Or Siri, you just ask Siri a question, right? So the curriculum allows for them to not just be limited to what's discussed in the classroom, but to do their own research, to ask questions. And I think as teachers, we need to be a little bit more open-minded to students asking questions, because sometimes they challenge us with their questions. But in that challenge, in that question that they're asking, they're really looking for knowledge. And sometimes it's good to give them that extra push, that for them to ask these questions. And sometimes there are questions we may not even have the answer to right away, but it pushes us to do our research as well. So it's a case where the teacher doesn't know everything, because it's a case where the teacher understands that students don't come as blank slates. They come with some level of understanding, they have experiences, they have a wealth of information. So it's just a matter of honing to what they have and basically getting them to, talk about their experiences, link that to if we're doing something new, and fly with it, do something else with it. Yeah, so given that this is a new thing that we're doing, it's a new curriculum or so forth, I think it's important that parents understand that there are times that their teachers will not send their child home with a lot of notes. And it may look like the teacher is not doing anything, but have a conversation with the teacher. Probably ask them, what did you do in math today, or what did you do in English today? So the child's book may not have anything, but they may have been involved in a lot of activities. And students tend to learn and tend to remember when they're having fun, when they're engaged. So I know we are accustomed to a lot of books and teacher marking their books and giving all the stars and all of that. You will still have teachers marking book, but not every day. It depends on what they're doing that particular day. And it's also good to talk to your child to understand what is happening at school, because you may not see any work in their book, but if you have a conversation with your child, you'll realize that they did a lot of things at school today. And sometimes the topics overlap as well. So they may do something in English today, and tomorrow they build on that in social studies or science or even math. Depends on how the teacher planned it. So it may sound like they're repeating things sometimes, but sometimes it's for reinforcement, and sometimes it's because this particular topic covers in both subject areas. And English basically touches everything, right? You can learn about every other subject from English, and English influences all the others. So yeah, my encouragement will be to talk to your child, talk to your child's teacher, and as much as possible, engage your child with reading and conversation. So yeah, that's it.